Hey, what's happening? Well, all right, man. Nice to see everybody out there. 10 years after I wrote this, the Book of Malachi, that which cannot be shown on the Facebook, or else seems like I get a little band blocked, pushed away to the side. Maybe it's the drips coming down her leg. I mean, I don't know what the official problem is with this cover, but there seems to be one. But I've been spent the last 8 months figuring out how to use this mic stand. I've been figuring the last 8 months writing this, which is Roadies and Rockstars. This is my story of how I got to New York City, how I got started in the business, and it is quite a tale. Almost painful at times looking back on it, but it was certainly a climb, and a climb it was. They talk about the ladder that you walk up on your way to success. Well, I did not miss one rung of the ladder. I'm going to turn down my kiss. Ace Frehley solo. Everything I need in life is in an Ace Frehley guitar solo. But this thing, man, 90,000 words, boy. It took a piece of my, took more than one piece out of my life writing this behemoth, that's for sure. And since Betty White is no longer available to read this for the audiobook, I'm going to have to do it myself. And I'm going to start peeling away with chapter 1 here for any of you that are interested in this. Here we go. Chapter 1. Raised by Beatniks. My parents were Beatniks making the scene in between Boston and San Francisco in the early 60s. I can't confirm it 100%, but I truly believe that my father was patient zero of the hippies. Boy, is that true. I think he was the first one. My father had gotten out of the army by spending every moment searching for the forms that could get him out. Finally, he discovered a stipulation that said you had to be a certain weight if you were a certain height, and he just starved himself and got out. Couldn't blame him. As two penniless beatniks traveling across the country, whenever my parents needed a reference for anything, they would just say, just call Professor Goulardi at MIT. He'll vouch for us. My parents had a friend who had broken into the MIT system and assigned himself a laboratory, a secretary, and a salary, all under the name Professor Goulardi. Legend has it that the best LSD that saturated the east coast of the United States in the early 60s came from that laboratory at MIT, and boy, do I believe that. By 1962, my parents had me and a guitar store in Boston's Harvard Square. At that time, there was no other place to buy quality acoustic instruments. That's true, too. My father was traveling back and forth from Spain to Boston, bringing back custom guitars. Business was booming, and they had captivated the attention of what was happening with the local folk scene. At some point, my father figured out that it was much more profitable to bring back guitar cases full of hash without guitars in them. And that's also true. My mom wasn't down with this program, so she took me and split. My father returned to Africa, and he learned the ancient ritual of proper hash making. And that is true, too. My father did learn how to make hash from the Arabs. And one thing that's funny is that you need a proper press to make hash. You gotta take that product that you got from the leaves and you gotta press it down with a press. Well, my father, of course, didn't have a press. So what do you think he was doing in the alleys of Casablanca in the 1960s? He was jacking up people's cars in the alleys and then setting the tires down on this pile of hash and using that as a press. My father tells me at the time that he had an apartment in Casablanca that was 8 cents a night, and according to him, he was having trouble paying the rent. When my father returned from Africa, he became the musical director for Timothy Leary and his LSD parties. He then went on to do several albums for Vanguard Records where everybody thought that sitar music was going to take off. He spent the rest of his life as the Forrest Gump of the hippies, blindly walking through every situation, completely oblivious to what was going on around him. Yet, shockingly, actually in the middle of international conspiracies, and boy, is that true as well. I mean, my father was there the night Bobby Kennedy got shot. He was getting high in behind the dumpster in the alley. He was at Woodstock. He was at Monterey Pop Festival. He was at every hippy dippy thing. He stayed at the ranch with the Manson family. My father went to a drive-in movie with the Mansons. Says he had sex with Squeaky Fromm. So how freaky is that, right? 1 degree of separation. His story is a book all to self. Well, that's true. My mom was a nurse in Cleveland, and I grew up as a latchkey kid, coming home to an empty house every day. It's just how it was. My after-school ritual consisted of feeding myself by making my own pot pies and teaching myself how to play guitar. 1 Gilligan's Island, 1 McHale's Navy, and my food was ready. That was the timer. That was the timer, because every latchkey kid knows from the 70s that pot pie takes an hour, and that is 2 television shows, or 1 Lost in Space, however you're getting down. We lived in Cleveland Heights in 1974, and 2 interesting things happened to me that changed my life forever that year. I got my first job, and a rock band moved in across the street. We lived in a duplex, standard for working class Cleveland style neighborhoods. After the rock band moved in across the street, a guy named Steve moved in upstairs that owned a portable sound system. He would become my babysitter when my mom worked a double shift, and I would go out with him and the band and do shows in the local biker bars. And that is true as well. That is true as well. You know what? So let me tell you, I'm going to tell you about that. Right? They were called, chapter 2, they were called Coco, and they were a local band in Cleveland. And I don't remember their set list, but I remember that they were the first band that I ever saw, 2 guitars, bass, and drums, getting down with it. And I was impressionable, and I was young, and this was hip and happening. And these were guys, these were men doing the thing. And I was all about it. And I would hang out with them while they were jamming. After many nights hanging out and sitting in the corner in the basement when they were practicing, I finally got the chance to go out and roadie a show with the guys. Mom was working a double shift, and these were the only guys to watch me. So they took me with them. I had an aunt in Youngstown, Ohio that loved riding motorcycles and hanging out in biker bars, and she would always take me with her. When she would get too drunk to ride the Honda back home, I would sit on the front and ride the bike, and she would put her feet down at the stop signs. My feet could only reach the pegs, but not the ground. So I was used to being around adults, especially in bars. And that's true. I could ride the motorcycle, but I couldn't put my feet on the ground. That was what she was doing. I was 11 years old and unloading the van and bringing the gear into the club. It's been almost 50 years since I loaded that show into that nightclub. And I could still remember the smell of the room when we walked in. And man, that is true, man. Every little detail, from the checkerboard floors to the dark wood bar, the 2 pinball machines in the corner on the opposite side from where we set up the soundboard. The flip side was a rock and roll punch palace, the corner of Cedar and Taylor in Cleveland Heights. Years later, a couple guys named Pete and Dewey would buy the place, put a hole in the floor, start serving wine, and turned it into a fancy place. Had cheese and crackers and everything. But when I was there in 1974, it was a shot in the beer kind of place with nothing but motorcycle parking out front. The guys played 3 one-hour sets that night. I spent a lot of time playing pinball and accepting alcoholic beverages from adults. Nobody cared that I was in there underage. I was a roadie with the band, and that's all that mattered to anybody. At some point, my official babysitter, Steve, the sound man, passed out behind the mixing console. I scooted right in there. I started grabbing some knobs. My first show, and I was mixing. The mixing console back then, it did not have faders. It had these big knobs, like the size of like a half baseball sticking out. I mean, I don't know what kind of console it was, but man, it was archaic. I don't even have a memory of being nervous about it. I just kind of stepped up. The show was over at 2 a.m. We loaded it out and put everything back in the van. I was so high on adrenaline and some other substances when I was standing on the sidewalk and I watched the bass player from the band leave. He walked out of the club, handed Steve his bass, and then he started his Harley, and a beautiful woman with long jet black hair got on the back of his bike, and they rode off together. That was the point when Steve said to me, "You ready to go?" And I looked at him and said, "I'm ready. I'm ready to do this for the rest of my life." And hanging out in the club and doing a show and drinking beer and puffing on people's reefer and watching beautiful women leave with guys on Harleys. I mean, like, what else at 11 years old could I possibly be interested in? Nothing else. Nothing else. And that was my start, and that was my how I got impressioned into all of this. I say to people all the time that when I meet them at work, meet them at the show, that we're all here, but we all got here different ways. We all got, and that's why I love people's stories in this business, because we have so many alike personality traits, but we all got here a different way. So that's the opening to my story. Roadies and Rockstars, 90,000 pages, 90,000 words of how I did it and how I got to New York City. When I really got into writing this, I was like, oh my God, I can't tell my, what am I going to make this like a encyclopedia sec, for God's sakes? It's got to end someplace. And it ends when I come to New York City, because, I knew one thing when I came to New York, that if I could make it here, probably make it anywhere.